Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on a brilliant Blu-ray disc set. This is a 3-disc Blu-ray disc set, and we have been discussing the films that are included in this wonderful set over the course of a number of videos. Speaking of the work which is described as or designated by Criterion at spy number 1203 respectively or collectively, and it's this work, which is Chantal Akerman Masterpieces, 1968 to 1978. And as some of you may know, you and I, my dear friends, we have been going through the films in order as they appear in this, as I say, 3-disc set. And they are spread out over the 3 discs. And there are so many wonderful examples of the work and artistry of this filmmaker, artist extraordinaire, who is the one, the only Chantal Akerman. And so with that, my dear friends, I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on the work which can be found on Blu-ray disc number 2 of this really monumental set. And this is a work which already exists in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog with its own Blu-ray, and I'll speak about that momentarily. But as part of this set, it is on Blu-ray disc number 2. And I'm speaking of a work which is described as being from the year 1975. And the name of the filmmaker is Chantal Akerman. And the name of the work is JEANNE DIELMAN 23 Quai de Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. Okay, here we go. This is the extraordinary work, the epic work, which is described as being from the year 1975, and it is written by Chantal Akerman and directed by Chantal Akerman, and with cinematographer Babette Mangold, and starring the legend, the one, the only, Delphine Seyrig. This is a monumental film. This is a landmark film. This is a film that has received so much attention and interpretation and a lot of discussion points. My goodness, so many discussion points about this work since its original release onto the world back in 1975 and all the way up to the present day. This is a real tour de force film filled with a lot of suspense and manners and mannerisms and details, which I'll try to speak a little bit about over the course of this video discussion. And I'm speaking of the work which is, as I say, from 1975, and it is the work which is, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language, I hope you can forgive me, but it is the work which is JEANNE DIELMAN 23 Quai de Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. And I note also that I think it can be Bruxelles or Bruxelles, but I use the pronunciation of Bruxelles based upon, for instance, how the director and star of the film pronounced the title in one of the supplements that is included as part of this Blu-ray or part of this Blu-ray set, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video among the other discussion points of the supplements that we can talk about in connection with this work. Once again, the work is JEANNE DIELMAN 23 Quai de Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. So this is a work which is, as I say, a landmark work. It's regarded as being one of the greatest films ever made, and it is certainly regarded as being one of the great masterpieces in the filmography of Chantal Akerman. And I think over the course of our exploration of this brilliant set from Criterion, I think we can say that already her filmography is filled with so many touchstone points, so many key points, critical points, points of brilliance and an individual spirit and exploration of space and time and the passage of time and the people and the personage and the way in which people interact with space. Identification with certain sense of say external values and internal types of say introspective points, notions of sex and sexuality, as well as aspects of say the written word and ritual and the dynamic of ritual and the expectation of ritual and perhaps the counteracting with respect to vis-a-vis or against or contradicting such rituals, which may be apropos a type of expectation of society, capitalism, and the like, as well as an expression of the individual creative spirit. These and other things have been a part, I think, a very key and intimate part of the filmography, perhaps the cinematic philosophy, if you will, that has been, I think, true to form, in full force and existence from the very get-go in this set. And therefore, and the reason why I mention it here is, I think one can say that those aspects and then some, I think, are truly captured in a magical, splendid, spectacular, and awe-inspiring and surprising way in this work, Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. And it's done so in a way that is also very suspenseful. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of the mannerisms of ritual, of the day-to-day living activities of a particular character, who is Jeanne DIELMAN, portrayed with such a type of a brilliant, almost antithetical type of calm exterior veneer on the one hand, which may or may not be masking or otherwise linking to something underneath. And that's one of the great, I think, aspects of watching a film like Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, because we as spectators, as viewers, I think, are invited to endeavor to try to know this character, Jeanne DIELMAN, as we follow her progressing throughout the days. This is a film that is covering approximately 3 days, 2.5, 3 days in the life of Jeanne DIELMAN. And my goodness, what a life this is. And so, my dear friends, this is one of the ultimate expressions of Chantal Akerman's filmography, one of the ultimate expressions of her cinematic philosophy. It is truly a force to be reckoned with. It is a brilliant example, one-of-a-kind work, and it's still so compelling. And I'll try to explain specifically why I feel this film has such a kind of ferocity and wonderful, inviting nature. It's also very fun to watch. In terms of the repetition and the details, trying to catch the details, what is the same, what is different, and that kind of thing. And so there is a type of fun aspect to it, as well as certain aspects of depictions of sexuality, gender roles in society. There are aspects of femininity and feminism. There are also aspects of life in sort of the context of ritualization of things which are within a type of setting of quote unquote domesticity, end quote, and whether or not that has any types of implications in terms of regret or a type of fulfillment on a positive scale. We'll have to touch upon those points and then some when we talk a little bit more about this film. Once again, the film is Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. And so with that, my dear friends, yes, let us now endeavor, you and I, my dear friends, let us endeavor to try to speak about the plot or story structure of this work. I think where we can go is something that I've already mentioned before, which is this is a work which is covering, as I say, the days, 3 days, 2.5, 3 days in the life of Jeanne Dielman. And so we see, what is this life composed of? What do we see, or what are we witness to as viewers of this film? So we are witness to aspects of her room or various rooms in her abode, this apartment that she lives in, which seems to be this apartment, part of an apartment building, which we understand or we can assume from the title itself. It could be some kind of clue in terms of where she's living in the world, as well as her address as well. And already we get a sense, not just from the title, but from the opening moments, that there is a kind of rigid structure, or maybe rigid is not the right word, but there is a way in which the camera remains still on certain shots. There's a kind of timing of shots which seems to be very planned and very planned and calculated in terms of a number of seconds. And then it cuts to a different shot of a corridor of a room, or it goes to another room. And then we see within these rooms, confines perhaps, or within these expressions of character, we see Delphine Seyrig and Jeanne Dielman undergoing or performing various aspects of what one might say could be the day-to-day routines, which include, for instance, um, making some preparations in the kitchen of her home, maybe setting things up, and also meeting what we understand to be one of her clients. And so we therefore understand too that Jeanne Dielman is also working as a prostitute, and we therefore see one of the clients enter, and then some kind of passage of time occurs, and then we see the client leave, and after that we see some money exchange hands, and then after the person leaves, we see Jeanne Dielman, again portrayed by Delphine Seyrig, put money in a bowl, take off the lid, put money in a bowl, put the lid back, turn on the lights, turn off the lights, go to another room, perhaps open a window, clean up the bedroom, maybe go to another room like the bathroom, begin to prepare to disrobe, undress, and wash herself, and then also wash the bathtub afterwards, and then prepare perhaps for the arrival of another person who is, we understand, the teenage son of Jeanne Dielman, who comes up a little bit later. And then we have further aspects of the ritual, such as the dinner time, maybe reading with her son, something to do with her son and her study and his studies, also letters that are received from what we understand are abroad, which we understand are also relatives of Jeanne Dielman and family from abroad. And we hear the words that are read by Jeanne Dielman from the letter in this very perhaps nondescript, almost unemotional way, but we also hear some clues or words or ringings of things beyond the scope of, say, the frame, something beyond even the boundaries of the country, across the globe, another part of the on the other side of the world, and questions and aspects about perhaps who Jeanne Dielman is, what is her character, what is her background. The letters or some of these clues, for instance, might hint at the possibility of maybe her relationships, or maybe her relationship status, or perhaps the possibility of any future relationship status situations going forward. And then also we see the way in which certain clues or hints or identities about, say, the way in which she seems to react to, or perhaps withdraw from, comments about sex and sexuality, or maybe how she seems to be drawn to, or maybe repulsed by certain other conversation points that again come up throughout the course of, say, the opening moments, plus also moments that are repeated. Because after all, if we take a step back, we also have to remember that Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, this work is also a film about patterns. It's about rhythms. It's about the day-to-day patterns, again, over the course of 3 or 2.5 days. Because as we soon discover, upon waking up with Jeanne Dielman for the following day and see her routine in the morning, and then entering into the afternoon and the late afternoon into the early evening hours, we begin to see that the camera work has certain patterns, the way that action is oriented within the space has certain patterns, the way that we follow Jeanne Dielman as she goes on certain errands in terms of shopping, and then preparing a meal, and sometimes we see her engaged in the preparation of what is planned to be, say, the dinner of the evening. And these turned out to be very famous scenes because of the precision of the order of the process that's also focused on. There's a very famous scene involving the preparation of cutlets, of meat cutlets, and the order in which the cutlet is, the meat is then, the order in which the meat needs to be dressed with, say, the breadcrumbs and then the egg, which comes first, etc. And so this becomes, I think, one of the really fascinating details in terms of precision and order on the one hand, and also the rhythmic pattern of repetition and the ritualistic aspect of repetitive patterns on the other, as focused in or as contextualized by the quote-unquote day-to-day activities of Jeanne Dielman over the course of, as I say, these 2.5 or 3 days. It is a fascinating adventure in this way already, because there are so many things that one can say in terms of, say, these quote-unquote daily scenes, these scenes that might, to some, might, in terms of the lens of certain interpretations of this film, might be indicative of quote-unquote nothing. Maybe these are scenes that could be interpreted as being focusing in on the ultimately mundane, or the dull, or the boring, etc. And that, I think, is one way to look at it. And I think that could be, I think, a very, that could take one to a very, I think, interesting interpretation of the film, because that could therefore be suggestive of maybe some kind of lack of fulfillment or promise in the life of Jeanne Dielman. We already find clues, for instance, through her interactions with her son and his studies and reading, etc. There is, or we can understand that Jeanne Dielman is, or seems to be, quite intelligent. However, if the film is focusing in on these moments of, say, preparing the meat and the breadcrumbs and the eggs, or maybe in later scenes, the peeling of certain potatoes, which also actually has its own significance compared to and contrasting with the preparation of the meat, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And also a similar thing can be happening with the testing of milk that may or may not have gone bad with the coffee, etc. And these types of ritualistic points may seem too mundane to be considered quote-unquote intellectual exercises. And if that's the case, and if that's the interpretation to be had for this work, which I think is very possible, then one can interpret these scenes as being, say, perhaps the throes of what one might call the throes of the external pressures, as exemplified by the expectations, gender expectations, as shown through the sort of limitations as expressed through these examples of quote-unquote domesticity. And so if that is, I think, one aspect of being able to interpret this film, Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, and from a kind of cynical or negative light. And I think that also I think shows a lot of potential too, because it does indicate, therefore, what are the hopes and feelings and dreams of a character like Jeanne Dielman. How are we as audience members expected to, or how are we to reckon with these possibilities? and the clues that we might say glean from certain scenes on the one hand, but also realize that perhaps she is under a certain type of external, maybe some kind of external force or pressure to act in a certain way or to perform certain rituals in a certain way because of expectations of gender roles in society, which may have a very negative connotation. So this is, I think, very possible to interpret this work by virtue of these various scenes that we see and the type of way in which the repetition might itself be seen to be too exacting and too exacting to be filled with anything of promise, but rather a kind of sense of the shackles of external societal expectations. This is, I think, one way of interpreting this work. However, what is so brilliant about this film, Jeanne Dielman, 28 du commerce 1080 Bruxelles, is that it is, I think, open to many other different types of interpretations, even these same scenes, because one can say that these scenes and the attention to detail, because Jeanne Dielman as a character, if anything, we understand that she is so focused on the detail and the exacting nature of doing things in a certain way with a certain rigid order. Even the way she has a certain pattern of say preparing the meal, or maybe waking up in the morning early before her son wakes up in order to be able to shine the shoes in a certain way that he's going to wear, or maybe it's preparing the coffee, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or maybe it's the order of things about turning on the light, lifting the lid, putting the money in the pot, putting the lid back, and then turning around and then turning off the light again, or maybe it's a certain errand involving taking care of a child or a baby with respect to another neighbor, which we also are privy to a little bit throughout the course of this film. Or perhaps it's the way in which she is looking for a particular button of a jacket and being very exacting in the store, and when she can't find the perfect match, she has to go to another store and try to find another match. Or maybe it's the same cafe that she goes to and the same table that she insists on sitting at a certain precise moment of the day, etc. So there is an exacting nature to detail that Jeanne Dielman we see exhibit. Or maybe it's the way in which she rides the elevator, goes down, and then opens or maybe she enters her building and then checks her mailbox and closes the mailbox and then goes into her elevator up to the place where she lives, etc. There are great, wonderful, brilliant, exacting natures of the process or the procedure or the ritual that, therefore, because of the care and attention to detail that Chantal Akerman is giving to these activities of Jeanne Dielman, this itself, I think, could be interpreted to be in its own way a kind of celebration, if you will, of the acts and activities of Jeanne Dielman. I mean, there is a meaning behind the process. I mean, there is a meaning to the order in which the meat is the breadcrumbs and the egg yolk is addressing the meat, etc. Or there is a reason why she needs to time the stove or the countertop because or there's a need to know exactly when she's going to heat the potatoes, and knowing that within the time that she is heating the potatoes and the time that her son will arrive home, this is where she also has maybe her another client coming in, because as I say, she also earns money in terms of her work in prostitution. So, but it's all very exacting to a rigidly set schedule by her, and because of that, there is a type of beauty in the ritual itself. I find it to be, I find it also, in terms of an interpretation, to be quite, to have a certain, how should I put it, focus in the exacting order of things, gives those things in their own way a type of beautiful meaning. and purpose, right? Because there is a purpose in trying to find the exact button. There's a purpose in trying to get the shoes fixed, or the soles, or there's a purpose in getting the timing just right for the boiling of the potatoes, or there's a purpose in getting the order of the breadcrumbs and the egg yolk and the meat just right, etc. From her point of view. And that's from our point of view, because I think from in a lovely type of way we begin to share the experience of Jeanne Dielman because of the way in which things are delivered to us and information is delivered through us to us via the cinema of Chantal Akerman. So this is therefore to say, in my long-winded way, I apologize, but this is therefore to say, I think it is possible, at the very least, to interpret this work on two seemingly contradictory fronts. Namely, perhaps these scenes of quote-unquote domesticity, end quote, might therefore be considered to be some kind of negative connotation into the situation and positioning of a person like Jeanne Dielman in society, on the one hand, or perhaps the very focus on the act of the thing itself, the procedure, the process itself, maybe lends itself to a kind of providing meaning or highlighting meaning to the very acts that I think are part of the very life structure, the day-to-day life structure, the days in the life of Jeanne Dielman. So I think either interpretation I think is very possible, which I think is one of the great strengths of this work. You know, it's a work that is given to many different interpretations, sometimes contradictory ones, but always, I think, very excitingly applicable. But that is but the tip of the iceberg, is it not? You know, I've spoken about the rituals, I've spoken about the procedure, the process, and the great camera work, and the way in which there's a rigid design to show us this information, as well as the brilliant performance by Delphine Seyrig as Jeanne Dielman, who is so exacting and precise. And we also understand this too because of not just the repetition of process and procedure, but also the repetition of the day. Because as I say, this is a story that takes place over the course of 3 or 2.5 days. So we are therefore privy to the ritual or the rituals and the day-to-day activities being repeated again. So we have, say, the early evening hours into the nighttime of day 1, and then we have a full day that's day 2. And so we get the activities of the morning, and then we go into the early evening hours, which then lend itself to a sense of repetition, the kind of rituals that we have already seen before. And so we are already given, bestowed with a sense of expectation. We are seeing the same things, but what's so exciting about Chantal Akerman's cinema here is that we are invited also to see what is the same and also what is different. And here is where we have potentially something happening which is perhaps very invisible, maybe imperceptible, at least from our perspective, maybe. But perhaps from the point of view of the characters, and specifically perhaps from the point of view of Jeanne Dielman herself, we understand that, again, we have day 1, day 2, and day 3, or part of day 1, day 2, and day 3. Over the course of what we understand is the second day, perhaps something happens. What is that thing? We're not sure, or we begin to think maybe something has occurred, because at a given point, things begin to change. This structure that we have been addressing, that we as viewers have been invited to be a part of, this world of Jeanne Dielman 23 quai de commerce 1080 Bruxelles, this world of things that we can expect somehow or another seem off. And there's something's quite off. It's not quite the same as the day before. Or maybe there's something about the demeanor or composure of Jeanne Dielman herself that's a little bit not quite what it was. Perhaps there is some kind of shift beyond a sense of self-control. Maybe there's some kind of thing that's off balance slightly, or perhaps even more than slightly, because as as we go into the end of the second day, into the third day, we understand that maybe something is happening that has shifted things to the point where the process and the ritual become skewed. and there is something that is off, that is either very minute or perhaps quite catastrophic indeed. And we get a sense of this because, as I've mentioned before, we have become acclimated to the world of Jeanne DIELMAN. We have been acclimated to her process to the minute. But if something is off, then perhaps it's not just an indication of a quote unquote a bad day, end quote, but perhaps it is an indication of something that is potentially going to change the life of our main character, Jeanne DIELMAN, forever. And you can get a sense of this in the details. It's all in the details. Perhaps it's the way in which maybe a piece of her hair is just out of place. Or maybe it's the way in which she may take something and perhaps forget to put the lid back. Or maybe it's the timing of the potatoes in terms of forgetting that they are boiling and overboiling the potatoes, thus needing to go out and get more potatoes and then peel them. And so we see her preparing the peeling of the potatoes or the meal in a way that is extended beyond the ordinarily established set routine or schedule. Or maybe it's getting the time just a little bit off when one wakes up in the morning. Or maybe it's something about if the time is off, then how does that affect her dealing with time and the passage of time, especially when we've had days in which her time is so packed, densely packed with a sense of rigid structure and schedule and order. What happens if there is a minute off, 10 minutes off, an hour off? How will that affect her? Will there be a sort of maintenance of kind of serenity and calm, or will it drive things completely out of whack? And it's in those details where even minute changes turn into these incredibly tense, suspenseful things. And we understand that perhaps something is afoot. Something is not quite right. Something is not quite what it is before. And it is this compelling nature that draws us even further into the world of Jeanne DIELMAN until we are confronted with what could be said to be a kind of inexorable conclusion as this film reaches its quite incredible climax. And so this is the work, if I were to try, as I say, to describe this film in sort of a plot way. This is the work Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1980 Bruxelles. It is an astounding piece of art. It is also incredibly entertaining. It is so entertaining. I must say, just again, this idea of repetition, it's so fun. It's so fun to try to catch the details. And it's reminiscent of a work like, say, La Chambre, The Room, from earlier in the set. It's one of the shorter films from Chantal Akerman during her time in New York, in terms of the camera going around a room and seeing what is the same or different with each new pass, and then going from one direction to another. It has a similar type of vibe because we go from scene to scene to scene, shot to shot to shot. Oftentimes we might see the same shot repeated again a little bit later, the action repeated again a little bit later. So it's fun to see what's the same and what's different. And my goodness, when you spot those differences, it just sends the heart aflutter. It's what's going on here? Something's not right here. My goodness, what's going on with our main character Jeanne DIELMAN? It's that type of suspense and tension that's there. And as I say, it's linked also to one of the ways in which I was trying to suggest one can interpret this film. You know, the fact that it's in the details that gives so much meaning to the character of Jeanne DIELMAN as a character, as a person. Thus, even a minute change can mean that the whole meaning of what she's doing can change quite catastrophically, potentially so anyway. And so I think that lends itself very nicely to, as I say before, the potential interpretation of this as the film focusing in, almost celebrating the importance of ritual and time to Jeanne DIELMAN, such that when we see the potential shifts or unbalance or lack of breaking of balance in those terms, we see how it might significantly affect her, at least potentially so. But also let me turn to, again, the other alternative interpretation, which I think is very valuable here, which is that looking at this in terms of a type of, say, Jeanne Dielman as a character perhaps being confined, being restricted or constricted, or it's the rituals, the overbearing nature of her focus on the ritual might leave her bereft of any type of a chance to, say, grow, quote unquote, in an intellectual manner, end quote, etc. So, and I think that is also, I think, a very, as I mentioned before, a very it's a very important type of interpretation to have, because it does lend the question, right? Who is Jeanne Dielman? What kind of person is she? Is she happy? Is she sad? Is she satisfied? Is she morose? Is she ambivalent? Is she, what is she feeling? I mean, that's one of the great mysteries of this film, and I mean that in a very positive way. I mean, there's some moments where she's sitting in a chair and we see her face or her manner or her demeanor. There might be some stillness, but what is behind that stillness? What is behind, say, and maybe within that stillness, what is the meaning of, say, a minor movement of her neck, or the shoulders maybe going up and down, or her hands resting on the side rest, the hand rest next to her, etc. Where are her eyes? Does she open her eyes or does she close her eyes? I mean, these things might signify nothing. They might signify everything. And so I think that's one of the great things too about this film is, who is Jeanne Dielman? We know, and yet we don't know. And so it's a brilliant thing, because it therefore means that this film can ultimately, as I mentioned, land itself in a multitude of possible interpretations, sometimes contradictory, but that's, I think, a sign of a great work of art. It's so entertaining indeed. And this is the work which is Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. And it's just a word about the title. You know, I think it's a very intriguing title, and I think it's interesting to note the name and also what I understand is the address. And it's reminiscent of the way in which, as I mentioned earlier, Chantal Akerman seems to also have a focus on rooms and how people interact with rooms. Sometimes they might be said to be quite oppressive, and sometimes we might see the rooms as a type of counteracting, or maybe activities that might be said to be running counter to what capitalistic societal expectations of maybe gender and class. I mean, we've seen, for instance, how the room became a very important thing in the first film in this set, which is Saute Mobile, and how Chantal Akerman in that film seemed to be acting with or against various aspects of rooms. We also saw La Chambre, another film that I mentioned in terms of the camera work, rotating around a pivot point in the room in various directions to see what is the same and what is different, and how objects may or may not be signifiers of a type of individual presence, or perhaps in a type of oppressive presence. So again, the contradictions are ever present. You know, are they positive or negative aspects? The same is true for a work like Hotel Monterey in terms of the passages and corridors and rooms of this particular point in New York. And Je tu il elle, in terms of especially the first part of that film, and how Chantal Akerman in that film is interacting with the room space, perhaps trying to deal with or struggle with some kind of expression or self-expression with writing or letters, maybe hinting at a kind of linkage with the interaction of time and space, and also the reconciliation of some kind of emotional trauma or difficulty that may or may not be existing within her at the moment. These and other points, I think, are also very prevalent within the way in which time and space and individuals interacting with that space are present in this work, Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. The rooms and the spaces themselves become either type of maybe oppressive spaces or liberating spaces, depending on one's point of view. I mean, it's almost a beautiful thing to see Jeanne Dielman interacting with the space while also seeing perhaps maybe it can be something very beautiful, or maybe one can see on the opposite side of that extreme, maybe quote unquote wasted potential, end quote. But there is something really remarkable about the way in which the film captures the details of the space. The way that the countertop looks on the kitchen, or the lighting, or the bathtub, or what we are privy of seeing with the bathtub, and even little things too in terms of what we see in the mirror and objects on the boudoir, or the night table stand, or things that are allowed to be on the dining table as the two of them eat, or what is not allowed not to be on the dining table. Is he allowed to read or not allowed to read, etc. And so uh, uh, and also the way in which the bed is handled, and also the sheets. This is also a really important detail as well, which is expressed in one of the supplements. The sheets and the sofa and the chair and sitting in the chair, and the way that the windows are opening and closing. So again, the interaction with rooms and space and environments and settings, as I mentioned before, they could be seen as a kind of positive or negative aspect. Negative in the sense that perhaps they might be seen as oppressive, or positive in the sense that they are extensions of a type of, in an interesting way, liberation expressed via contextual space. And so this is, I think, a brilliant aspect of Chantal Akerman's cinema. Because time and space, this is the stuff of cinema, right? We are asked to see these images that are depicting some kind of passage of time of people or characters through certain defined spaces we call settings or environments. And so, what if we have a kind of complex relationship that is expressed between the people that are within the frame and the spaces that they are occupying at that present moment? And I think that's also part of the fun. It's also part of the complex nature, the wonderfully brilliant complex nature of this and other films. I must say too that this is a work that I remember when I first saw it. It was very challenging, incredibly challenging film. Maybe partially due to the running time of this film. I mean, it is a very long film, relatively speaking to other films in the set, 201 minutes. So it might be regarded as being quite a long work. But I think over time, I have grown to watch this film, as I mentioned, so entertaining. The time just goes by very quickly because you kind of know what to expect upon rewatch, and that's part of the fun of the film. But uh, um, again, it's all in the details, and I can say too that it's like those games where you see this huge picture and you try to find detail. It's like those picture books, like Where's Waldo books, or things of a similar nature, where you try to find little details, and some things might be so similar, and yet there's one thing that's a little bit off, a little bit different, setting it apart from another thing. And is in all other parts equal. So that I recognize the fun nature of watching a film like this and other films in the Akerman filmography. And so it became my way of being able to engage with this further, and then also just being swept up with the suspense and tension of this, and also the beauty and brilliance of the type of ritual that is shown both in terms of the story of Jeanne Dielman herself within the scope of the film, and also the way in which the film is made, and the great, beautiful rigidity and great precise calculation that is at work here. This is such a great film. This is such a great film. I hope as many people get a chance to see this as possible through this set or through other means, and we'll talk about other things. For instance, the earlier single Blu-ray release from some years back. But my dear friends, this is the work which is Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Jeanne Dielman, 23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, as part of this 3-disc Blu-ray set, Chantal Akerman Masterpieces, 1968 to 1978, and the film can be found on the second of the 3 Blu-ray discs, together with some supplements that are found on that second Blu-ray disc. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. Please note that the film Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles is the only feature film to be found on that second disc. And when we talk about the remaining films of this set beyond Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, we will go to the third Blu-ray disc. But right now we're focusing on Blu-ray disc number 2. And I have the booklet here, the wonderful, robust, multi-pages staple booklet. I love it. I love it. And we will talk about the booklet and all of its wonderful contours and writings a little bit later, maybe in a separate video. But I've turned to page 42 of the booklet because it has a description about the masters and the presentation here. And it says here that restorations of all the films were undertaken by Cinematheque, Royal Film Archive of Belgium. If I go down a little bit to the paragraph, the large paragraph found in the middle of page 42, I can find, and I quote, for Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, the 35mm original camera negative was scanned in 4K resolution and restored in 2K resolution, with the original monaural soundtrack remastered from a 35mm sound negative and a 35mm positive print. I have, that's the information found on such page of the wonderful booklet. Now, I should mention here too that the film Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles is also under an individual release that was made a few years back. And this is designated at spine number 484. And here I have the Blu-ray. The film Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles can also be found in its own separate individual Blu-ray. I don't see any indication of the spine number 484. I don't see any indication of the spine number anywhere within the parts of this set, but just keep that in mind, in terms of one's cataloging of the titles within the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, for instance. It does have its own release, it does have its own spine number. And in terms of the presentation of the earlier Blu-ray, I'll turn to the booklet page where it talks about, here it says the transfer. Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.66 to 1. On standard 4 to 3 televisions, the image will appear letterboxed. On standard and widescreen televisions, black bars may also be visible on the left and right to maintain the proper screen format. Supervised by director Chantal Akerman and cinematographer Babette Mangold, this new 2K digital restoration was undertaken from a 4K scan made from the 35mm original camera negative by the Cinémathèque Royale de Belgique. The monaural soundtrack was remastered from a 35mm sound negative and a 35mm positive print. So my understanding, therefore, is that again, based upon my eyes and my ears, which I understand, which I admit are very, very limited in terms of their skill in picking up things. I'm very, very poor when it comes to using my senses in a way to detect things. I very much apologize for this. But to my eyes and my ears, what we see in this Blu-ray set appears to be the same as what we get, or what we got in the earlier Blu-ray. I should point out that for me, I think the disc itself, I think, is quite a great example of experiencing this work from Chantal Akerman. But it's nice to see the film appear again under this presentation. And I admire it very much because the presentation as it looked here, and also as I think it's the same looking here, I admire it very much because there is a type of flatness to the image, and I think that's very much on purpose. The flatness of the image makes it, I think, very successful, because in a kind of interesting way, it's very enticing and inviting. It invites you to try to say, penetrate the dimensional nature of the work and thus the presentation of the character Jeanne DIELMAN. You know, we want to know who she is, and perhaps there's a kind of barrier, something that's preventing us from doing so at first glance, at first blush. And I think in a very subtle psychological way, at least from my perspective, the way in which there's the flatness of the presentation, I think it enhances this effect, I think, to a great degree of success. And I think it's also enhanced too because sometimes there might be instances within the frame where that type of quote unquote two-dimensional aspect might be broken. Maybe there's a flash of light that occurs from the outside into the interior spaces of Jeanne DIELMAN's apartment, especially when the lights are out. Or maybe there's a way in which the corridor might seem there might be an instance where it suddenly cuts to a different point of day of the same shot, but that has a kind of effect of maybe breaking the two-dimensional space, etc. And these things can be really jolting. And so I admire that very much. And so I think from a psychological perspective, at least from my vantage point, in terms of how I take in the process of the film, I'm very happy with how it looked in the earlier Blu-ray, and therefore how it looks with this new Blu-ray as well. And so therefore let us now talk about the supplements of the piece. And so yeah, let's go to a discussion of the supplements. And so what I've done now, my dear friends, I've put the second Blu-ray disc into the player. And so now it's playing on the player, the TV behind me. Just note that, again, I apologize. I don't want to offend the copyright YouTube gods. And so the Blu-ray menu, it's a great Blu-ray menu because it's a compilation of various shots and scenes, a kind of montage from all the films. It's in fact, I think, the same montage of the Blu-ray menu from Blu-ray disc number 1 that we also see for Blu-ray disc number 2. So it's not Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles specific, although there are some shots from that film, but also from other films, say from the other discs 1 and 3. So it's a wonderful amalgam. But it is a series of moving shots, and so just in case, I'm just going to cover up this part for purposes of this YouTube video. I hope you don't mind, but I do have the disc in the player, and you have the option of selecting the film. It is the only feature film on this Blu-ray disc, but you go to, it has a chapter section, and then the supplement section and the subtitle section. So if I press on the supplement section, we have 4 supplements that appear in the supplement submenu. And I should point out that these supplements do appear also in one form or another in the earlier Blu-ray. That I mentioned here, the Blu-ray where the film is designated spine number 484. So they are carried over from what we saw on this disc. There are actually other supplements on the earlier disc that we see, or the earlier release that we'll see elsewhere in the set, or that we have seen elsewhere in the set, or that we will see elsewhere in the set as we discuss other aspects of the set, maybe in a separate video. But please note, therefore, of what we've seen earlier, 4 of the supplements are carried over onto this second Blu-ray disc in the Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978 3-disc set, disc number 2. So with that in mind, let us turn to the first supplement, which is Autour de Jeanne DIELMAN. And this is described as this documentary shot by Sami Frey and edited by Agnès Ravez and Chantal Akerman during the shooting of Jeanne DIELMAN looks at the on-set relationships among Akerman, actor Delphine Seyrig, and the crew. So this is a wonderful kind of making of documentary. I mean, one can say it has a type of great, almost fly on the wall aesthetic. You know, the camera is there, but we see the for the most part, there is actually one point where there's a kind of interview with I think a journalist that comes in a little bit later, but for the most part it's on the set, or maybe practicing or working with some of the details of set dressing or decoration. There's one point a little bit later where there's a kind of almost debate about the sheets on the bed. But I think among the great things about this great documentary, Making a Feature, which is about an hour and 8 minutes, by the way, this is focusing, you see so much of the on-set relationship between Chantal Akerman and Delphine Seyrig, which is electrifying. It is really electrifying, and sometimes we see moments where it's somewhat tense, in fact. And I don't mean that in any negative way or disparaging way. I mean that I think very honestly, because you can tell that both of the artists here are trying to approach this work uh, with a real degree of authenticity and sincerity. They really are. And sometimes they are aligned, but then once in a while we see them not quite aligning, or maybe there is some kind of a discussion, maybe even debate, maybe even disagreement between them. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So um, get the sense of, for instance, maybe Chantal Akerman's, sometimes we hear her comments to Delphine Seyrig, for instance. Delphine Seyrig maybe in moments trying to seek some kind of motivation or some kind of inner working of the character, whereas Chantal Akerman is heard to say, for instance, that it's not psychological, or that's not her interest, that's not the focus, but it's in a type of ritual manner, the timing of things as well. So this is really quite important. Also, details too are very important in terms of, for instance, the way in which the speed by which Jeanne DIELMAN brushes her hair. And there's a moment where we can hear the two of them discuss the actual tempo and the speed with which the brush is to brush the hair. It's absolutely fascinating. And also, there's some scenes that are discussed and maybe prepared or dissected or analyzed or the like. So I mentioned that there's also um, the coffee scene. There's a very famous scene involving coffee and drinking coffee, because out of a mug or a jug, and also the heating of water, and also the adding of milk. And the milk may or may not be spoiled, and so this is a kind of very famous scene. And so there's a discussion too about the coffee and the drinking of the coffee in the space. This is in the kitchen, also handling the kitchen props and the placement of, and also there's some tension there, but I think it's all for the benefit of making the film as great as it can be from the vantage point of Delphine Seyrig and also from the vantage point of Chantal Akerman. And so and also things too, like how many pillows are there, or the gesture of the hand, etc. There are some points too where it becomes quite tense indeed. And so this is in many ways a kind of it's very interesting to see how Delphine Seyrig responds to certain moments, and also how Chantal Akerman responds to certain moments as well. This is a great documentary we're making a feature, so or featurette or supplement. So please check it out if you can. It is an hour and 8 minutes. Now I should point out that we did see it also on the earlier Blu-ray. So if you've seen it before on the Blu-ray, you can watch it again on this new Blu-ray set. That's fine. And it's subtitled as well. And it was subtitled in the earlier Blu-ray, and it's subtitled now on this Blu-ray disc number 2 for this new set from 2024. However, on my disc, now I don't know if this is true for all discs. Maybe if you have the set, if you want to check your Blu-ray disc number 2, please do so. But when I play it, it's the subtitles are fine, except when we hit the hour mark, approximately 1 hour mark, a 60-minute mark, and there's something that one of the people says, which is, as the day progresses, the pace gets faster and faster. Well, what happens is when we hit the hour mark, in fact, that subtitle freezes. And so it's stuck on that subtitle, even though we know that, for instance, Delphine Seyrig and Chantal Akerman and others are still speaking, and they're talking about other things. And what they're saying later does not, I think, correspond to the phrase, as the day progresses, the pace gets faster and faster. And so I think what this is maybe a little defect with the subtitle, at least as far as I have here for the Blu-ray disc number 2. So at the hour mark, when it hits the hour mark, the subtitle freezes on that line, and it doesn't give me any more subtitles. So I don't know what is being said beyond the hour mark. So as I say, it's an hour and 8 minutes. So there is a final 8 minutes, which is actually focusing in on one of the climactic scenes of the film, sort of the making of. You see how many people are in that room, and the crew. It's amazing. But yeah, I don't know what they're saying, because I'm not fluent in the language, unfortunately, but I had to rely on the subtitles. But if it freezes like that, then I have no way of knowing what's being said in those final 8 minutes. I should point out that actually those final 8 minutes they seem to be subtitled appropriately here. So there's still movement in subtitles. So for whatever reason, the subtitles work on the supplement when it appears on this earlier Blu-ray disc, but not at least when it appears on the second Blu-ray disc of this new set, the one that I have anyway, the copy I have. So just keep that in mind. If you do have a similar issue, my suggestion is maybe contact Criterion directly, and maybe they might be able to address the issue. Maybe it's a little flaw or something that they can correct for you. But just keep that in mind. At least that was occurring for my particular copy here. But I hope that doesn't take away from the effect of the documentary, because it's really, really great. So please check it out if you can. This is Autour de Jeanne DIELMAN, excuse me, Jeanne DIELMAN. Next is Chantal Akerman on Jeanne DIELMAN. And this is described as, this interview with director Chantal Akerman was conducted for the Criterion Collection in Paris, in April 2009. This is approximately 20 minutes. We did also see it in the earlier release, but it's nice to have it here. Chantal Akerman sitting in her room, La Chambre, and speaking about early influences, experimental films from the late 60s, 67, 68, speaking about influences in terms of her love of cinema. Jean-Luc Godard is mentioned, Pierrot Le Fou is mentioned, and then also the idea too of the anthology film archives, her time in New York, experimental cinema, La Chambre, the creation of suspense, she mentions this here, and also meeting Babette Mangold, who becomes a really important artist collaborator with her in terms of La Chambre, Hotel Monterey, and of course Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. And so also meeting Delphine Seyrig and that interaction, working with Delphine Seyrig, and the time it took for Chantal Akerman to write the script, because there was a script, and also the idea too of roles of femininity and feminism, and also the idea of ritual. And there's something that she says here which is, I think, really key, which is she says something about the importance of rituals and the peace of knowing every moment of the day. There's a kind of peace of mind about knowing things, which I think is very apropos. A certain reading of the film Jeanne DIELMAN, Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. So it's really lovely. And also the idea too of the treatment of time, how time passes. There are some incredible moments in the film where we actually feel time passing. And also there are jumps in time as well, but we also feel time passing. So, and then too, the idea of the importance of hallways, doors, mirrors, the outdoors and the indoors, and also the crew. She talks about how the majority of the people who were on the crew were women, and how this was something that she felt was very important on the one hand, but she also takes this opportunity to make the comment about how she didn't. It wasn't necessarily her trying to maybe make a sense of something. Kind of, it wasn't her. It wasn't meant to be a kind of political statement or meant to provoke in that way per se, but rather it was a kind of, among other things, it was in terms of the approach, sort of philosophy of the approach, and also the philosophy of the filmmaking of the story itself that they were telling, because they're telling the story of Jeanne DIELMAN, and one aspect, as I mentioned, of reading this is from the viewpoint of kind of the female point of view, as she mentions here, Chantal Akerman mentions here. So I think that is a very interesting, nuanced perspective that she gives. And also she mentions too a little bit about the reaction to the film. Marguerite Duras' reaction as well is mentioned here, etc. So this is great. It's approximately 20 minutes, so please check this out. It's 20 minutes, right? Yes, 20 minutes, so please check this out if you can. It was found in the earlier Blu-ray disc, but it's always worth listening to interviews with Chantal Akerman if you can. It's great, absolutely great. Then we have Chantal Akerman and Delphine Seyrig. This is the third of the 4 supplements found with Blu-ray disc number 2. And it says, this segment from French television program Les Rendez-vous du Dimanche, hosted by Michel Drucker, features director Chantal Akerman and actor Delphine Seyrig discussing their work together on Jeanne DIELMAN, It originally aired on February 15th, 1976. Again, we find this supplement also from the earlier Blu-ray, but it's carried over for purposes here. This is approximately 6 minutes, I want to say. Yes, 7 minutes, excuse me. 6 to 7 minutes, and it's a kind of discussion of what Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles is. There's a moment early on where the host is trying to say the title, and he almost gets it right, but he forgets the 1080 part, so Chantal Akerman very gently corrects him, so it's very interesting. And they're standing in front of what kind of blue screen effect, and so we have the three of them with shots or stills from certain representations of the film, which is a really interesting way of conducting an interview like this. And we also hear the genesis of the film from Chantal Akerman herself, and also from Delphine Seyrig's point of view, and also featuring this type of character, Jeanne DIELMAN, statements that might be said to be made in terms of feminism, and sort of the importance of types of spaces and exteriors and interiors and the like. So really great. It's brief and really great. So please check this out if you can. This is Chantal Akerman and Delphine Seyrig. It's also interesting to see the great dynamic between the two. You compare their dynamic here. I mean, they're being interviewed together, of course, but you compare their dynamic here, Delphine Seyrig and Chantal Akerman here, and you compare it to their dynamic in the earlier Auto de Jeanne DIELMAN supplement, the first one on this disc. It's really fascinating. So please check this out if you can as well. And then the fourth supplement, which was also found in an earlier release. This is Babette Mangold, who was a cinematographer and also a collaborator with Chantal Akerman on a number of works, starting with La Chambre and Hotel Monterey. But this is described as, this interview conducted for the Criterion Collection in April 2009 features cinematographer and longtime Akerman collaborator Babette Mangold discussing Jeanne DIELMAN. This is approximately 22 minutes. And we hear, for instance, the circumstances that brought Chantal Akerman and Babette Mangold together, and also the circumstances in New York, and also the intertwining or the cross-section with the experimental film movement there, and also living in New York and also feeling a sense of, say, isolation that Babette Mangold expresses, which also we understand was something that Chantal Akerman herself seems to express. When we talk about another film later in the set called News from Home, I think we'll get an interesting sense of this perspective of Chantal Akerman's time in New York, a little bit later from this period, but still we'll talk about that a little bit later in a separate video. And then turning to the supplement with Babette Mangold, she does speak to about the genesis surrounding their collaboration on the earlier works La Chambre, which is again part of the set on Blu-ray disc #1, and also Hotel Monterey, and also the idea, for instance, the importance of elevators and the interior scenes for most of the film Hotel Monterey, except for how the film closes itself out. So, and also we're reminded too about how elevators are really important in many of the works of Chantal Akerman. I mean, we've seen elevator scenes in, say, Saute ma ville, also Je tu il elle, and Hotel Monterey, and also Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. There's a wonderful moment where she's riding, Jeanne DIELMAN's riding the elevator up, and then she's riding the elevator down to check the mailbox and riding the elevator up. It's really great, and even they're framed very similarly as well. So very interesting. So. And Hotel Monterey elevator scenes, of course. And also speaking a little bit about aspects of improvisation, also the script and the screenwriting process. There's a reference that Babette Mangold makes comparing Chantal Akerman to Bresson, Robert Bresson, I think. So very fascinating connection. Also some scenes too, talking about isolation, the dinner table scene between mother and son, framing devices that are used here. And then also she speaks to about watching the film and realizing the scope of the magnitude of how this film is a masterpiece. So this discussion with Babette Mangold is so key, so brilliant. As I mentioned, it's approximately 22 minutes, so please check it out if you can. It's great, absolutely great. And again, we've seen these supplements from the earlier disc, the earlier release from some years back. There are actually some other supplements that can be found here, which might find themselves in other parts of this this set. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yes, these are the supplements which I think for the most part could be said to be link to Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. Although we can say maybe that the second supplement here, Chantal Akerman on Jeanne DIELMAN, does have some aspects of Chantal Akerman discussing her early life. So some points about La Chambre, Hotel Monterey. The same thing can be said with the Babette Mangold interview, also from '09, talking about the lead up to Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. So the time in New York, meeting Chantal Akerman, there's collaborations together, La Chambre, Hotel Monterey. So it could be said also to be touching upon those films as well. So related to those New York films, but of course, maybe could be said also to be primarily focusing in on Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, which is, I think, why it's what one can say is very appropriate to have these supplements contained on this Blu-ray disc number 2, which has the film itself. So it's great. Really great. And that's not all, because as I mentioned before, we will have another discussion about some of the other supplements to be found in other parts of this set, but they're really great. So now let me turn our attention, if I may, very quickly to the booklet. We will talk about the essay and writings of the booklet because it is a kind of comprehensive booklet. It's really great. It's a staple booklet, as I mentioned. Ah, yes, hooray for staple booklets. The robust staple booklet. But we will talk about this in a separate video, talking about other aspects of the set overall, writ large. But let's take a moment, again, for the purposes of the discussion with respect to Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, that, for example, there is a section of the booklet that is focusing in on the film, starting on page 28. And so we have page 28 and 29 here with the essay, the writing, kind of critical essay by Béatrice Loiza. It's a great one that extends over into pages 30 and 31 here. And on page 30, we do have a description of the cast and crew credits, and also the film itself, 1979, 201 minutes, color, monaural in French with English subtitles, 1.66 to 1 aspect ratio. And then some scenes as well. Look at that. The very important bottle of milk. And the can, which we understand is kind of a flask of coffee. Yes, but in any event, it's really, yes, this is a great essay. It's a critical essay, so it's not a synopsis. Not that there's anything wrong with synopses. I love myself a good synopsis, but it's also great to get the critical essay as well in this sort of mini form. So we've been getting those so far with all the films up to now in this booklet, and this is no exception to that. It's really great. So, but there's also the comprehensive essay earlier in the booklet, which, as I say, we'll touch upon in a separate video discussion to close out this video series on discussing these films in this great set, Chantal Akerman masterpieces, 1968 to 1978, among which is the masterpiece from 1975, which is Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. Oh, yes. So, my dear friends, that's it for now. So let's end it here for now. We'll continue the discussions on this set. There are, as I say, 2 more films to discuss, and they'll be found on the 3rd Blu-ray disc. Plus, there's another discussion that I have regarding talking about this set overall to conclude our journey with respect to this Criterion set. I don't know about you. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with these films, and I hope you are as well. And this film, Jeanne DIELMAN 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, is, I think, no exception to that. It is a remarkable achievement. Every time I see it, it just grows in stature. Just absolutely grows in stature, and just it's filled with life, death, and everything in between, and the days in the life of this one very enigmatic figure, as portrayed by Delphine Seyrig in this brilliant work by Chantal Akerman. Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. So, my dear friends, let's end it here for now, but we will see each other again, I hope. So, I hope to see you at the next video, where we'll be talking about the next film in this set, I think, which is News from Home. But until then, my dear friends, please continue to be happy and healthy and well, And please keep on watching a lot of great movies like Jeanne DIELMAN, 23 Quai du Commerce 1400 Bruxelles, like other films by Chantal Akerman, such as the films to be found in this great set, like other films in the Criterion Collection, and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.